The Canon 60D was released back in 2010. Now, at the time, this cost around $1,100. I know because that's how much I paid for this camera. Nowadays, you can find it used for around $260. So, just what do you get with this 11-year-old camera? Well, there's an 18-megapixel APS-C size sensor, a fully articulating 3-inch 1.4 million dot LCD screen, a 3.5mm mic input for external audio, and 9 autofocus points. More on that in a minute. Build quality on the 60D is good, but not great. You know, you've got to remember, everything from the 10D through the 50D was like a semi-professional camera. Those all had magnesium alloy bodies, but with the 60D, Canon was trying to protect the 7D, so they intentionally sort of downgraded its physical appearance. You know, instead of having the magnesium alloy body of its predecessors, the 60D just kind of has this polycarbonate resin. It's really sturdy, and it's still ironically very heavy by modern standards, but just know that it's not the same kind of semi-pro body that the 50D was before it. In terms of photography, the 60D is actually still pretty good. I mean, you've got that 18-megapixel sensor. You know, images are sharp and clear and all that stuff. The biggest drawbacks on this camera are, one, dynamic range. You know, I've purposely backlit myself here so you can see what I'm talking about. That background's just pure white. You know, there's no color detail in that sky whatsoever in order to expose for me. But there's still an even bigger issue with the 60D, and that's the autofocus. This camera has literally 9 autofocus points, and it's just, they're not accurate. You know, I mean, and I've even taken to just purposely selecting one single autofocus point. Like if I'm shooting in like portrait mode, I'll take the one point that corresponds with my friend's face, and it would still just sort of miss her face 90% of the time anyway. You know, that's an issue. That's the kind of thing you have to keep in mind with this camera. Now, in terms of video, you've got 1080p at 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second. If you want any type of higher frame rate, you're going to have to drop down to 720p, and the most you have there is 60 frames per second. That was pretty standard back in those days, but unfortunately not particularly great by modern standards. The other biggest issue with the 60D in terms of video is there is absolutely no autofocus in video mode. It is 100% manual focus only. Having said that, and you know, as I've been trying to illustrate with this footage of filming on the 60D, images from the 60D actually still looks pretty good though. So, of course, that begs the obvious question, is the 60D actually worth it in 2021? And unfortunately, the short answer is no. I mean, just the sheer existence of the 70D itself makes it too hard to actually recommend the 60D in 2021. You know, where the 60D is just very dated with that bad dynamic range and that absolutely awful autofocus in photography mode, and just no autofocus in video mode, the 70D actually corrects all those problems, and it only costs about $50 to $100 more. You know, the 70D has genuinely good autofocus, and it's just reliable. Like literally all of last year, I filmed all of those videos on a Canon 70D. Wasn't until just a few months ago that I switched over to filming these videos on the Canon M6, and really, that was just because the M6 is so much smaller and lighter and I could fit it in my bag easier. 70D though is still perfectly fine. See, what I look for when I make these videos on this channel are cameras that are such hidden gems that they were once really, really expensive and now they've come down to an incredibly low price. The problem with the 60D is the price hasn't come down enough to match its shortcomings. You know, it's still kind of inflated, and yet it has these very glaringly obvious problems which other cameras in that same price range don't actually have. That's the problem. You know, there's too many cameras in this $200 to say $350 range that are actually more modern, have great autofocus, have, you know, at least 1080p up to 60 frames per second and something. They don't really have the limitations that the 60D has. See, that's the thing. If the 60D had come down in price to around $175 or $180, I would be recommending it. I'd say, oh yeah, go jump on that, man. That's a great camera. You know, you'll definitely like it. But at $260 to $300, it's just too much, man. It's just not worth it. Anyway, I think that's all I've got for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.